Fala, clube, beleza? Leia aqui. E é o seguinte, pessoal. A gente vai ver hoje, fazer um react. Eu ainda não assisti o trailer que saiu, um trailer maior com gameplay de Avowed, que é o novo RPG da Obsidian, né? De Pillars of Eternity, do Grounded, uma empresa bem conceituada. Então eu vou assistir aqui com vocês pela primeira vez esse trailer e vamos ver se realmente ficou bom, né? Vamos ver como é que ficou. Já separei aqui no PC, tudo certo pra gente começar esse react. É a primeira vez que eu faço um vídeo nesse formato. E aí, se vocês puderem deixar o feedback no final, tamo junto. Sem mais delongas, vamos lá.
We have Carrie Patel here from Obsidian, as well as Gabe Paramo from Obsidian. Can you guys
Game Director de Avowed, né? Beleza. Ela que apareceu no Develop Direct 2024, tá ligado?
Yourselves just briefly what you do at Obsidian and on Avowed.
My name's Carrie Patel. I've been at Obsidian for over 10 years now, and I'm the game director of Avowed.
My name is Gabe Paramo. I'm the gameplay director, and I've been at Obsidian for about 5 years.
Cool. We'll delve into those roles a little bit. But first, we're actually recording this a little behind the scenes here, right before the Dev Direct goes live. Like, how does it feel like you're just about to share Avowed with the world?
It's so exciting. I mean, I know the team has put so much hard work into this game, and we're going to get to see a little bit of that in some of the footage we're looking at today. And so it's really rewarding knowing all the love and polish that's gone into this to finally get to show people where Avowed is headed.
It was very cool being down at Irvine, filming with you guys for Developer Direct. So I got to be behind the scenes, and it was very fun to see the office.
Eu vi aqui que eu tava com a barrinha ali embaixo na legenda, mas eu já tirei, tá? Pra não atrapalhar.
To see everybody busy working, but also excited to present about the game. And we're gonna, in just a minute, see actually some extended footage from the Developer Direct, so it's very exciting. But let's talk about Eora first, because we are in Eora. That's part of a world that you guys have built previously for the Pillars of Eternity universe. So a world
aqui, ó.
You guys have...
Que massa, velho, essa cena. São como se fossem espíritos, né, ligados a essa pedra. Dado o tamanho, eu nunca parei, nunca tive coragem. Mas acho que a Avowed vai ser um bom gatilho pra gente retomar isso aí nas lives. Quem sabe a gente não termina a Avowed, depois vai pra Pillars ou ao contrário. Seria bem interessante. Enfim, essa cena é muito massa, velho.
Built previously for the Pillars of Eternity universe.
E aí, o que é interessante, Eora, que é o planeta de onde vai ser o palco, né, pra Avowed, ele é o mesmo planeta de Pillars of Eternity. Se vocês olharem no vídeo passado que eu fiz sobre Develop Direct, tá lá separado, você pode pular direto pro vídeo. Se você abrir no YouTube, lá embaixo, na descrição do vídeo, você pode pular direto pro capítulo e você vai ver que lá eu mostro o mapa. Se der na edição, eu coloco o mapa aqui pra vocês verem. Esse jogo vai se passar em Living Lands, que fica ao norte, né? Bem ao norte de onde se passou o Pillars of Eternity 1 e Eternity 2. É uma ilha mais selvagem. A gente, quem sabe, não fala mais sobre isso depois, mas vamos continuar para eu não falar muito.
So we know that that's very Obsidian-like, of course, but in Developer Direct, you both talked about Obsidian's pedigree and like what makes Avowed a very Obsidian game. So what, aside from Eora...
Vou falar, essa aqui é opinião totalmente pessoal aqui, com coração. É um dos estúdios que eu tenho mais apreço, é a Obsidian. Depois que eu conheci com o trabalho que eles fizeram em Fallout New Vegas, hoje em dia é meio outdated, né? Mas tipo, pra época, assim, eu testei o jogo, não joguei. Aí depois eu tive tempo pra jogar de fato, aí joguei e vi o que eu perdi na época. É um jogo excelente, e aí depois eu fui pra outros games deles, como eu tô jogando agora, finalizando o Pentiment, que é deles também. E tô jogando Grounded, mas Grounded eu tô jogando, acho que eu tenho mais de 300 horas de gameplay. Não sei, mas joguei muito Grounded e ainda não terminei. Tô lá Tier 3, tamo indo. Mas o que eu quero dizer, é um estúdio que eu tenho muito apreço, porque se você olhar os produtos deles, eles têm uma pegada de profundidade naquilo que eles fazem. Não é um negócio superficial. O próprio Grounded traz um feeling, aquela nostalgia, tá ligado? Dos anos 70, não sei se é 70, 80, 90, enfim, daquela época lá de Stranger Things, né, da Guerra Fria, e ele traz esse feeling jogando no mundo, jogando no ambiente survival e ao mesmo tempo, pessoal, trazendo elementos que são lúdicos, infantis, né? Que são crianças, lá a visão delas, das crianças, você vê como é que eles visualizam o jardim e tal. Mesma coisa Pentiment, você vai jogar Pentiment, cara, parece uma disruptura. Pegaram assim o estúdio e quebraram no meio, porque você vai jogar um game que é muito baseado historicamente pra época, na Idade das Trevas, o auge da Inquisição. Você vai jogar Pentiment, é um negócio assim que, se você, como um player, tiver disposto a ler, ver o conteúdo extra que tem no livro de Pentiment, você começa a entender a época e aquele negócio meio que cativa você. Aí eu tenho até uma resguarda aqui pra falar, uma ressalva. O Pentiment não é meu estilo de jogo, eu não gosto de point and click, mas o fato de estar ali aprendendo e pegando o hábito da leitura, ao mesmo tempo que a gente tá desvendando o assassinato e aquela coisa toda, me cativou. Agora é um jogo que não sei explicar porquê, eu não consigo jogar muitas horas. É um jogo que eu jogo um pouquinho, paro e volto a jogar, né? É mais questão de gosto mesmo, tá ligado? Já Ground, se deixar, eu jogo o tempo todo. Mas enfim, é uma empresa que quando faz um produto, você vê que eles se dedicam pra passar a visão daquele produto. Eu acho isso muito bacana neles, e é uma empresa que sempre achei, assim, justa, né? Tipo assim, do ponto de vista de consumidor, tá? Enfim, vamos ver, né?
Context and building off of the Pillars universe, what would you both say makes it an Obsidian game?
Ó, essa
For me,
pergunta foi
it's really
excelente, ó.
about our
Vê essa pergunta.
What would you both say?
O que vocês diriam, né, qual é a assinatura deles em Avowed, que a pessoa que vai jogar vai perceber que é do estúdio da Obsidian, né, do projeto deles?
Makes it an Obsidian game.
For me, it's really about our player-centric approach to roleplay. Our studio's motto is "Your world's your way," and so the way we really approach choice and consequence and everything else is just giving players opportunities to define who they are in this world, how they want to behave, like just what fantasy, what challenges they want to undertake. And so with all of the content we design, whether it's...
Olha que interessante que eu percebi aqui, ó. É uma coisa que eu sinto muito falta em RPG em geral. E é o Conversation History. Muitas vezes você tá conversando com um cara, quer pegar alguma coisa pra tomar uma decisão que você falou antes. Aqui, aparentemente, eles implementaram isso. Bem legal, né? E viu que ela falou, foi bem enfática em relação à questão de RPG, né? De escolhas, de fazer o mundo ao seu estilo, né?
What challenges they want to undertake. And so with all of the content we design, whether it's quests, companion relationships, or gameplay, which Gabe can talk to, we really try to create this player-shaped whole so that we're always leaving room for players to really step in, drive the game in the shaped relationships, or gameplay, which Gabe can talk to. We really try to create this player-shaped whole so that we're always leaving room for players to really step in, drive the game and the story forward, and just define who they are in this setting.
Yeah, from the gameplay perspective, right, if you look at Grounded, Grounded is your world's your way. You get to build whatever world you want. In the context of Avowed, right, we've tried to...
Eu juro que eu não sabia que esse cara ia trazer Grounded pra mesa da discussão, mas é exatamente isso que ele tá dizendo, velho.
Build whatever world you want. In the context of Avowed, right, we've tried to lean into that with the gameplay mechanics and sort of let the player, through the loadout system, through what companions you can choose, through the abilities they can choose, they're throwable that they can select, right? Just what does the player want to do for combat, and being able to support that in as many ways as possible.
So in the Dev Direct, you kind of swoop through very quickly. There's a lot there to take in. So as Tina said, we have some extended footage here, and we're actually gonna, we're gonna bust out our telestrators and we're gonna pause and say, okay, well, what did we just see here? So why don't we roll some of that footage and let's get into it. All right, so tell us, where in the game is this area? How do you encounter it, even?
Olha que interessante, acho que umas velas ali, alguma coisa na iluminação ali atrás, muito bonito, ó. Ou até fungo, né? Porque os fungos dessa parte de Eora, eles são bem reluzentes.
Where in the game is this area? How do you encounter it, even?
So this is Shatterscarp, which is the third region in the game. But what we're exploring here is just one tiny little adventure space in one corner of the region.
And is this something you could even like miss? Is this an optional area or something you're definitely going to hit?
It's absolutely missable. Discoverability and letting players be the authors of their own experiences obviously very important to us. So the content you're seeing here, the quest you're encountering, the little stories and nuggets of adventures you're finding, that's really for players who go out and seek it out.
Essa parte também é importante, pessoal. Vê só. Você pode pular, você pode ignorar.
An optional area or something you're definitely going to hit?
É uma área opcional, tal, olha o que ela explica.
Absolutely missable.
Ela falou, it is absolutely missable. Ela disse que é absolutamente esquipável. Você pode realmente ignorar e tal. E aí ela vai explicar que, na verdade, é o player que vai atrás da aventura através da exploração, vê?
Discoverability and letting players be the authors of their own experiences obviously very important to us. So the content you're seeing here, the quest you're encountering, the little stories and nuggets of adventures you're finding, that's really for players who go out and seek it out.
Ela tá dizendo que é um conteúdo para jogadores que vão lá e buscam, de fato, a aventura, que exploram. E aí, não necessariamente é uma área que você vai passar a seguir a campanha principal. Pelo menos foi isso que eu entendi. Fala aí no comentário o que você achou.
Exploration gets rewarded, of course, and this is, from my understanding, a side quest too. So it's definitely something you can stumble on, decide to partake in or not. But I'm curious, who are these enemies? Because I feel like we just wandered into their territory and it's just a family having a good old time, and we're just killing them out of nowhere. So who are these enemies and why do we hate them?
Caralho, que foda.
Well, I don't think we hate them. Actually, they're fine. It's more that they just don't really. There are Zorups, right? They're from Pillars of Eternity. They don't really speak a language that we can understand, but they're very territorial, right? So you've stepped on their space. They're trying to get back their territory in this area, and yeah, they're just gonna take down whatever gets in their way.
Can I just call it? We've confirmed swimming. Swimming is part of this game now.
Confirmed. But speaking of enemies, as we're going through...
Nadar gasta estamina, que tá falando aqui, ó.
This game now.
Yep.
Confirmed. But speaking of enemies, as we're going through this area, I'm just curious, what are the other types of enemies that you might encounter, and what does that difficulty progression look like? I know we're about midway through here, but perhaps later in the game, what does that look like?
Well, we've shown off ogres, and we've shown off, big, scary-looking bears.
Yep.
But yeah, we have archetypes, right? So like healers and brute melee characters, brute range, people that are trying to use magic, melee attacks, right? So just a bunch of variety of enemies that you can fight and have to use the gameplay mechanics in order to defeat. Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff in the combat that actually I want to go back to. So if we can back that video up and go back to that first encounter.
Speaking of gameplay mechanics.
Exactly. I have some questions here. Yeah. Okay. So you're armed. I see you immediately you pull out a sword and a shield. It looked like there was a parry move that the player uses here.
Parry move.
Well, it's coming up here in a second. And then also charging the shield. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is our dual wielding system. Basically, the player has two loadouts, and you can put something in your
Essa informação de gameplay é legal. O player tem dois loadouts, ou seja, você pode deixar equipado dois conjuntos de equipamentos. O cara também estava falando ali que tem o parry, né, o movimento de parry, e tem uma espécie de toss, né, de charge, ou uma porrada com escudo para frente.
And a weapon in your primary hand, and we allow the player to mix and match one-handed weapons.
E aí você pode combinar, né, esses dois conjuntos. Que é aquela questão de pegar uma varinha, depois pegar uma espada, etc.
So right there what you're seeing is your sword and board, right, going into it and trying to close the gap in the distance and having the ability to parry with your shield and power attack with your sword.
So there was a shielded enemy and it felt like the sword and board stopped working. But then you also, right there, you pull somebody in, a little get over here.
Ele mostrou aqui uma habilidade que puxa o cara.
The sword and board stopped working. But then you also, right there, you pull somebody in, a little get over here. Talk to us about some of the different skills and abilities.
Yeah, so that's one of our ranged units that basically is out in the distance. You're using Into the Fray, which is a mechanic to allow you to pull the enemy closer to you. Again, we have power attack. That's a blocker. That's essentially not your basic melee attacks are just not going to go through it. So you're gonna have to use your power attack to be able to break their block.
or you can swap to the wand.
Tô
if it's
ficando
a
hypado.
shielded enemy, you're not getting through to them. So how often in the game do you find, maybe yourselves through the experience? I'm much more a magic player. I suspect I will be heading down like more of the wanded path, but clearly there's diversity with enemies and diversity in how you need to approach
Essa
them.
pergunta é muito boa também. Sou muito mais um jogador mágico, né? Ela tá falando que gosta mais de usar magia. Eu suspeito que eu seguirei o caminho da varinha. Aí, onde é que ela quer chegar agora, ó? Mas claramente há diversidade de inimigos na área, etc, né? E também a diversidade de como você vai lidar com eles, né?
Can you talk about like how much you guys maybe in your play experiences have been swapping between them? Like what can we expect as players?
E aí o que ela quer saber, o que é que jogadores como ela, que tem um arquétipo muito mais definido, um arquétipo, pessoal, é tipo um trejeito, né? Uma forma de jogar muito mais definida, que ela joga como maga, como mage. O que é que isso vai impactar nela? O que é que isso impacta nela? Já que existe a diversidade de inimigos, ela vai ser obrigada meio que a trocar pra virar um combatente de armadura, de espada e escudo. Aí o cara vai explicar, vamos ver.
We definitely try to have these mechanics that are common amongst most weapons, but at the same time try to give the space across all the different weapon types. So, if you're using the wand, there's a lot of homing going on there. There's a lot of it's magic damage. It's going through their armor and stuff like that.
That's why I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Versus, again, using a melee weapon where you're going to have to get closer to them. Yeah.
So a little bit personal style, a little bit like what are the enemies you're actually dealing with in that moment.
Pronto, então a conclusão que eles chegaram dessa conversa é: você vai sim conseguir jogar do seu jeito sempre, né? Mas aí, obviamente, que cada arma tem seus limites e dá pro cara masterizar. Foi isso que eu entendi aí. Fala aí se vocês entenderam isso também. Tipo, dá pra completar o jogo seguindo só o caminho da magia, mas durante os combates, fazer a variação vai facilitar, pelo que eu tô entendendo.
The great things about the system that Gabe's team has been building, though, is it's very flexible.
É muito flexível o sistema que eles vêm construindo, né? O Gabe vem construindo com a equipe dele.
Supports players mixing and matching between weapons, between ability trees. Respecking is, pretty easy for players who really want to try something different.
Ela explicou que dá respect, né? Que é resetar todas as suas skills, fazer esse reset é bem comum, bem tranquilo, e você vai ter a liberdade de combinar várias builds diferentes pra jogar, etc. Isso é bem bacana.
So when I'm playing, I kind of love to follow my sense of curiosity, and sometimes you'll find a new unique weapon with some pretty nice buffs on it, and maybe you'll decide to rock that for a while, even if it's not what you've been using previously.
So there is a skill tree in this game.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
Tem um skill tree. Eles acabaram de confirmar. Então tem uma árvore de habilidades aí que você vai upando, mas você pode dar respect.
Okay, good. Yeah. I love a good skill tree, so it's good to confirm that.
One of the things we've done in terms of skills in the tree is we've tried to, pillars as classes, right? We wanted to be able to grab as many abilities from the trees as possible and sort of categorize them a little bit differently so that the player doesn't feel like they're locked into a single choice at the start of the game. They can kind of mix and match between different abilities, so you can get some you have some variety. You can choose to kind of commit to between.
Isso aqui é interessante, ó, essa explicação dele.
Classes, right? We wanted to be able
Pillars, né? Os jogos Pillars of Earth foram o que deram a experiência pra eles chegarem a esse nível de maturidade. E aí ele fala, queríamos ser capazes de pegar o maior número possível de habilidades das árvores e categorizá-las de maneira
and sort of categorize them a little bit different.
Um pouco diferente, para que o jogador não se sinta preso a uma única escolha. Então, o que ele tá explicando aí pra gente existe sim uma árvore de habilidade, elas têm uma certa liberdade que não prende você numa categoria. Tipo assim, se você começar a botar ponto pensando em ser arqueiro, não necessariamente você tá preso ao uso só do seu arco e flecha, e vai poder fazer outras variações de skills sem prejudicar o que você gosta, que é o range de ataque, nesse exemplo que eu tô falando aqui. Foi isso que eu entendi. Pode misturar e combinar diferentes habilidades.
between different abilities, so you can get some you have some variety. You can choose to kind of commit to being a fighter, right, per se, but it's not an enforced kind of class setup.
Ele tá dizendo que não é uma configuração forçada. Tipo assim, se você não quer ser um fighter, né, um guerreiro, um lutador melee, não, você não vai ficar, seguir outro caminho não vai excluir totalmente o uso de certas características do lutador, do fighter, entendeu?
And as Carrie said, you can respec if you don't like the direction it went down.
I love that.
But there are definitely some pretty fun and wild combinations, like, you can do your traditional sword and board, or, play more of a magic wielder with a grimoire and a wand. But you can also take a pistol and a shield and just charge around the battlefield and fight characters at medium distance. And you can use some of the different abilities that you're seeing in this playthrough to support that flexibility.
And on that note too.
Outra coisa que ela falou ali anteriormente, que eu pensei agora, tava processando aqui, muitas vezes o jogador encontra um equipamento único, uma arma única, e aí você quer testar aquela arma, mas aí como tu já tá fazendo outra build, você, já cheguei até aqui, nesse jogo não vai haver punição, você troca a build, faz o respec e testa a sua arma novamente. Isso é uma coisa que eu acho muito positiva, inclusive.
Dual-wielding wands. I probably mentioned this last time we were in an interview together for Showcase Extended, that I was so excited about it, and when I was down at Irvine, the team was very generous to let me play a very early build, and I got to experience the dual-wielding wands, and it's so snappy and fun. It's exactly what I was thinking
tá elogiando isso aí, ó.
But I'm curious because we're seeing a little bit of that now, where you have different spellcasting effects on each. So I imagine there's probably some really incredible combos. Have you seen some special combos yourselves, or maybe what testers have managed to pull off?
Yeah, definitely. So, with Into the Fray, you could use like a fireball ability that creates like an AoE on the ground, right? And then pull the enemy into the fire.
I love
and they get on
Olha
fire.
que legal a combinação que ele falou. Into the Fray, eu acho. Nesse jogo você pode jogar, por exemplo, uma bola de fogo no chão, perto da sua área, e puxar o inimigo. É uma combinação de skill. Então o jogo vai te dar liberdade para você usar sua criatividade e fazer o combate da forma mais prazerosa possível pro jogador, pelo que eu tô entendendo. Tudo que é isso que eu tô falando aqui é o que eu tô interpretando, tá, pessoal? Se vocês interpretarem outra coisa, ou por acaso verem que eu interpretei errado, porque às vezes eu faço a leitura errada aqui, né? Lembrando que isso é a primeira vez que eu tô vendo e já tô falando o que eu penso. Aí vocês comentem, entrem lá no WhatsApp da gente pra participar, pra gente conversar, beleza?
Incredible combos. Have you seen some special combos yourselves, or maybe what testers have managed to pull off?
Yeah, definitely. So, with Into the Fray, you could use like a fireball ability that creates like an AoE on the ground, right? And then pull the enemy into the fire.
I love
and they get
Devious.
on fire. But in terms of the wands, right? Like what you're seeing there is a sort of enchanted wand, and there are potentially other elements that you can maybe find, but Pillars is really known for their unique weapons and the unique permutations of enchantments that you can kind of see on them. So yeah.
So in this particular area, I did also get to play through this part, and first I realized you need to take out the healer first, otherwise it's like going down an up escalator. You're not making a lot of progress.
That's a good way to put it.
This is where I found that you really start to put these things together. So you froze that larger enemy. So sort of talk about some of these elements and how you can even use them outside of combat.
Yeah, so we have an elemental system where you can,
Tá dizendo que existe um sistema elemental.
like guys on fire, you can freeze them, you can shock them. We have objects in the world that the player can interact with. They're not just on weapons, right? They're not just on wands, right? You might find something with a sword that has it, right? A certain ability.
Ele tá explicando que existem também, nos próprios equipamentos, como ele tá dando nesse exemplo aqui, uma espada que tem habilidades especiais. Aí eu não entendi se é elemental, que podem causar danos elementares, tá aqui na legenda.
This might cause elemental damage. Also, your companions themselves, could have potentially some damage there that...
Acho que o Companion você vai poder dar equipamentos pra eles, igual a Pillars of Eternity, no estilo tipo gerir a par. Isso seria muito bom.
There was something when I had gotten a play where I wandered somewhere else and ran into an area that was gated off, and I was able actually to use that freeze to help to progress in the exploration.
Yes, yeah. And so we have objects like that. We also have,
Aí é interessante. Ele perguntou se pode usar esses elementos mágicos para auxiliar na exploração. Tipo, tem algum objeto que interage com elemento, esse tipo de coisa. Outro ponto bem positivo, gostei.
Maybe being able to burn brambles. Yeah.
Yeah, you can destroy barriers to
destruir barreiras para encontrar novas áreas para
find areas to
explorar.
explore. You can freeze paths in the
Congelar
water
caminhos de água para passar por cima.
maybe reach ledges that you can't
Caralho, que foda!
normally. Lots of fun.
Uma salva de palmas aí, profissional.
We saw a Tanglefoot ability, for instance, which was really cool because when you're freezing an enemy, you're totally freezing them. But when you're trapping them with the Tanglefoot ability, like ranged attackers can still get you. So there's a lot of nuance there that as a player you have to consider. But also a lot that was built off of the Pillars of Eternity universe. Like Tanglefoot is directly associated from those games. So I'm curious, like, how did you guys hone in on these abilities? Like, what are the combos you were thinking about? Anything that you brought over and maybe changed or made new too?
Yeah, so for Tanglefoot, but because in an action first-person game, it's all about movement and trying to like crowd control. For Tanglefoot, right, it's about also creating space. So we already had freezing. You're crowd controlling that way, but with Tanglefoot, it's a little bit unique where they're rooted, and so they don't move, but they can still do attacks. So it's about trying to find that balance where you're not overpowering the enemy, and there's again choice and consequence for these mechanics, so that the player just doesn't like just stomp everybody all
Essa
the time.
habilidade aí Tanglefoot é aquela que bota a raiz no chão e prende o inimigo, né? Que ele tá explicando.
Let's go back a little bit because we got an opportunity to talk about that very Obsidian style depth and breadth of gameplay. I have watched the developer direct so many times, I've memorized all of your guys' lines, so that is directly lifted from there. But there's another very Obsidian element to Avowed, which is branching dialogue and how
diálogo ramificado, muito bom.
you make choices within the story.
No diálogo. Ela tá falando de alguns elementos que tem presente no jogo.
Too. And Carrie, you alluded to some consequences potentially if you make one decision or another, but it's again very much like playing your own way. So can you talk about just how impactful like those choices that you make are and that branching dialogue and how that can result in different paths for the player?
Absolutely. So again, for us, creating these choices like the big ones that affect the outcome of a quest or, the well-being of certain characters or communities are just as important as the smaller choices that you make and navigating a dialogue and kind of, in subtle ways influencing your relationship with another character. But all of it is really centered around letting the player be the main character in this setting. And so what we're seeing here is, the players, they've been exploring this grotto. They're finding the bodies of these dead soldiers and kind of picking up pieces of a story along the way. And so here they finally found the survivor and talking through them about what happened and getting a little bit more information. So there is a moment that's going to come up after this where the player can confront the guy who ran away and make a pretty impactful choice with him about how they decide to navigate that conversation. And they can either, it's very obvious that this guy was in over his head, and then they can either sympathize with him and console him a little bit, or challenge him for his cowardice and for the way he abandoned his unit. And the way the player navigates that conversation definitely has big consequences for how that encounter plays out.
So you mentioned your player being the main character, but they're not the solo character. We see in this conversation Giada and Kai, I want to say. Can you tell us about the relationship with companions and
agora eu vou falar de companions. Agora, é bem interessante o que ela tá falando aí, né? Que ela disse que eles queriam trazer um elemento aí que é o seguinte, que a maioria dos jogos, né, isso é comum, é comum a gente ver em RPG que as escolhas mais importantes e que realmente fazem diferença no universo, no mundo onde você está inserido, são as escolhas grandes, que impactam comunidades, cidades, etc. Eles quiseram fazer isso de uma forma mais minimalista, ao ponto de que qualquer diálogo, por mais fútil que seja, tragam diferenças no relacionamento entre o jogador, que definitivamente, pelo que ela explicou, vai ser o herói da história, né? Vai ser o que está em destaque, e os outros personagens. E aí eles querem fazer com que essas pequenas conversas, por mais banais que sejam, tragam algum impacto. Muitas vezes isso, pelo que eu entendi, vai ser através do relacionamento entre os companions, mas também deve fazer diferença com outros personagens que têm mais relevância, né? Mas não 100%, tipo, tu for falar com um vendedor comum e tal. Mas foi isso que eu entendi daqui. Não sei se vocês entenderam isso também. Manda aí o recado, beleza? Mas achei bem interessante. E agora eles vão entrar num ponto de qual é o impacto dos companions nas conversas e tal. Isso é uma coisa interessante, porque em The Outer Worlds, que eu esqueci até de comentar, que é um jogo da Obsidian também, os companions, eles têm um papel fundamental nos diálogos. Tipo, conversam, tal, trazem informações, participam. Isso dá uma mecânica muito boa. E eu acho que eles devem ter amadurecido mais esse aspecto e trazido pra Avowed num outro patamar, talvez, ou melhorado. Vamos ver o que eles vão falar sobre isso.
Yada and Kai, I want to say. Can you tell us about the relationship with companions and how they interact both in the story and in gameplay?
Sure. So, your companions are your traveling partners in your journey through the Living Lands. They all have deep ties to different regions of the Living Lands, and they all have their own personal reasons for wanting to ally with the player and help them resolve the big conflicts that you're encountering over the course of the game.
Até aí, padrão de qualquer RPG, isso, hoje em dia, tá, para um jogo de 2000, que a gente tá em 2024, para um jogo de 2024, tem que ter isso, né? O compêndio tem que ter uma motivação e, no mínimo, vantagens e desvantagens, seja em alguma área, contra algum monstro, alguma coisa desse estilo aí. Vamos lá.
Game. So they're your allies, in some ways your advisors, your local...
Ó, são seus aliados e, em certos aspectos, são seus advisors, né? Seus conselheiros.
Guides, and they provide...
Fornecem guias. Então, o companion aí é realmente o companion, né? Ele vai estar ali auxiliando, vai ser um parceiro de aventura, pelo que ela está explicando aqui.
A lot of additional commentary and context that reveals something both about their character, but also about the corner of the world that you're exploring. And Kai in particular has a pretty deep history with Shatterscarp that comes out a little bit over the course of this quest as he starts to see how the region and the people have changed in his absence and maybe where he let them down. But obviously they're also your allies in battle, and that's something that Gabe can speak to.
É interessante, quero ver se a gente vai poder customizar a árvore de habilidades dos companions também. Como é no próprio Pillars of Eternity. Você tem uma party para gerir.
Yeah,
né?
so for the companions, we wanted to make sure that they had their role in the combat systems. And so, again, like I talked about, Kai can help you with the burning brambles, and Giada is healing, right? And so Kai's kind of your tank. He has an ability that's called Taunt. Or it's not called taunt, but it's a taunt, and a taunt allows you to basically make the enemy take aggression from them and start to focus on Kai, and then Giada can have the ability to heal your party.
Aqui, basicamente, o que ele tá explicando é que a mulher tem alguns aspectos de tanque, algumas habilidades, e o cara tem uns aspectos de healer. Padrão também de qualquer RPG, quando a gente fala em compêndio, qualquer RPG de fantasia medieval.
Yeah, they have impact in combat as well, yeah.
Should we assume there will be other companions throughout the game as well?
Yes.
Tá perguntou se vai ter mais companions aí, com certeza, né?
You'll meet a couple
Obsidian
more.
sempre faz
Kai and
isso.
Giada are just two of them.
Okay. I just know Obsidian known for some pretty
exactly.
great companions.
I was going to say the same thing.
Olha aí, o cara até comentou, a Obsidian ela é conhecida por excelentes companions, aí eu não discordo não.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly an expectation. But you mentioned Shatterscarp. I'm already really sad for Kai, and I already want to console him because I feel like, there's some history to uncover there. But what is Shatterscarp? That's obviously where we are in this mission, in this extended footage that we've been seeing from Developer Direct.
Bonito,
what is
véio.
the context to
Olha,
Shatterscarp?
porra, a parte do mar aqui tá bonito.
Yeah, so as you can see, it's a very arid environment. A lot of the locals who have settled here are originally from Rawatai, which returning Pillars players will recognize as kind of this very fun but somewhat militaristic culture, which Kai originally comes from as well. So you've got this sort of very hardy little settlement on the cliffs overlooking the coast called Thirdborn. But what the player encounters here is a ramp up in tensions between their people, the Adirian Empire, and the locals. Again.
Ó, aí ela tá explicando que tá tendo uma tensão entre o Império Aidir, né? E as raças locais, né? Que é aquela... Eu esqueci o nome agora do lagartezinho.
Rawatai, which returning Pillars players will recognize as kind of this very fun but somewhat militaristic culture, which Kai originally comes from as well. So you've got this sort of very hardy little settlement on the cliffs overlooking the coast called Thirdborn. But what the player encounters here is a ramp up in tensions between their people, the Adirian Empire, and the locals, again, here primarily settled around Taians, as everybody's sort of trying to negotiate some conflicts that are taking place and, starting to grow in the Living Lands.
Legal.
You're also seeing the stronger effects of something called the Dream Scourge, which is this spiritual plague that you've been sent here to investigate. And just to add into that mix,
aqui é uma informação interessante também. Ó. Vocês também estão vendo os efeitos mais fortes de algo chamado
the stronger effects of something called the Dream Scourge.
Dream Scourge. É o flagelo dos sonhos, que é uma praga espiritual.
Which is the spiritual plague that
que a gente veio pra cá, pra Living Lands, pra investigar.
Sent here to investigate. And just to add into that mix, we've also got an archmage who has taken up one corner of the map and created her own little frozen labyrinth there. So there are a lot of different characters, a lot of different tensions.
Então ela falou aí 3 tensões principais que eu capturei. Confirmem aí também se vocês viram algo a mais, mas tem um arquimago supremo num lugar gelado, que ele tá arquitetando alguma coisa lá, né? Tá com um espaço, um território dele. Tem a praga, como é que ela falou? Dream Scourge, eu acho. A praga de sonhos, que é uma doença espiritual que a gente veio investigar. E tem as tensões entre o Império Aedir, né? E esqueci agora. Os lagartozinhos, beleza? Esses são os 3 principais conflitos que vão estar acontecendo naquela região.
Navigate and that the player's going to get to encounter here.
Carrie, stop, you're saying too much.
So we're noticing just with the player, they're mantling their way through. It's a very vertical area, and there was actually one part of the footage where they look down and there's enemies there, and they choose not to engage. So if you could just talk about like the size of this area and just like how that...
Será que vai ter stealth? Essa pergunta foi boa também. Ele tá dizendo, ó, o cara passou ali, viu os inimigos e não atacou. Vamos ver onde ele vai chegar.
To, like, choose...
Dá pra escolher com quem se envolver ou não em combate.
Literal path.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like it's open zone.
Como ele tá dizendo que uma zona aberta é possível, mas aí ele não chegou no ponto que eu queria, que era stealth.
Right, so comparable to Outer Worlds areas on the larger side, and multiple paths essentially to be able to tackle combat situations.
Or avoid them.
Or avoid them, yeah, exactly, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this area is entirely discoverable, which means it's also entirely missable. And I really want to give a shout out to...
Da mesma forma que todas as áreas são grandes e inteiramente descobríveis, elas também são esquecíveis. Você pode só passar e nem viver aquela parte da aventura.
To Tyler McCombs, who's the area designer who set up the little grotto we're exploring. As you mentioned, there's a wonderful sense of verticality, just a lot of wonderful nooks and crannies to explore, and that's something that we really wanted to take advantage of and also set up, as Gabe mentioned, really fun combat encounters around that let you either just, jump in, charge right in, or take a more tactical and measured approach. And you see that even in this first combat that you encounter when you dive through that skull's mouth and you come up out of the water. Our playtester here takes the rightmost path, which is the sneaky one, but you can also just, Leroy Jenkins your way up the middle and just jump right into the fray.
Leroy
I love that. Well,
Jenkins.
we got so much additional detail in this podcast. Really appreciate you both joining us. But before we wrap up, we have just a couple more questions too. Developer Direct is like an interesting show for us because we hand over complete reins to the developers, wanting to give you all an opportunity to talk about the craft, the very Obsidian craft in your guys' case, that goes into the game and how the team thinks about things when you're putting things together. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that kind of team culture and also both of your roles. Like, how do they integrate? What does a creative director do? What does a gameplay director do? And what's your day-to-day working together like to bring this game together to life?
Want to start?
Sure. So as the game director on the project, I'm responsible for setting out the vision and helping to guide the team in all of our different efforts towards that, and make sure that we're really building a cohesive and exciting player experience. And both the joy and the challenge of that is RPGs are so feature rich and so content rich. We have so many different systems supporting our combat, our exploration, and then there's the way we build quests, the way we seed them through the world, the way we try to nudge players towards them without being too heavy-handed about it. And so, I'm always trying we're always trying to balance how these elements work together to, again, create an experience that's cohesive and consistent, but also allow room for surprises and nuance and fun, and not get so precious about the dogma of what we're building that we don't allow for those expressions of creativity and those things that, we as developers love to create and we know players are going to love to find.
Yeah, as my role as gameplay director, I'm trying to direct a team for that's kind of more revolved around conversations, exploration, and combat, right? That's kind of the big overseen parts of the game, and just working with Carrie to just make sure that we're following our pillars.
If you will.
Exactly.
No pun intended.
Exactly. Following our pillars, and having little back and forth fights, right? About whether the blocker should be holding a shield or the blocker should be holding a spear.
You were absolutely right, by the way.
So be holding little just seeing parts of the game, and just working with Carrie to just make sure that we're following our pillars.
If you will.
Exactly.
No pun intended.
Exactly. Following our pillars, and having little back and forth fights, right? About whether the blocker should be holding a shield or the blocker should be holding a spear.
You were absolutely right, by the way.
Just making sure that we're working together to be able to get the gameplay features that are fun, make sure it fits in the lore, make sure it fits part of the world, make sure we're not doing anything that's maybe doesn't fit within the Obsidian brand, right? Like things that are mechanics that are too binary, right? And more, a little bit more, less black and white, and a little bit more like how RPG players would like them to be. So yeah.
And one of the great things about...
Então, vou resumir aqui o que eu entendi e vejo se vocês entenderam isso aqui também. O papel dela é manter a visão geral do produto que vai ser entregue, certo? E o papel dele é entregar as características de mecânica de jogo que sejam compatíveis com o produto que ela visualizou para o mercado. Vê se é isso, se não for, me diz o que há nos comentários.
Our studio culture is, so many of us are...
Lembrando que eu falei de forma totalmente resumida, pelo amor de Deus, né?
RPG fans, and I feel like one of the real strengths of being a mid-sized developer is we are, just...
Eles se consideram desenvolvedores de médio porte ainda.
Large enough to be ambitious with the gameplay and the content we build, but also, small enough that we can still be nimble and again, still, allow people to take big swings. And the Leviathan Hollow that we see in this this playthrough is a really great example of that. Originally, it was scoped to be much smaller, and again, we found that the area designer Tyler, who was working on that, had a schedule. Things were going great, and so his producer and his lead kind of, looked at the schedule and said, yeah, if you want, you've got time to make something more out of this. And we've got an excellent showpiece here that, again, is, a wonderful combination of, strong planning and coordination on the production side, to be sure, but also just some really great initiative, from the team.
So it's something I've been wondering since Avowed was first revealed a few years back with that teaser. And that is what can we glean from the title? When I think of Avowed, you can vow revenge. You could be avowed enemies. It feels very personal. I'm just curious, what we can take away from the title as I want more now, but this is all we're going to get today. But just what can we be thinking about here?
So I won't say too much this time, Gabe, but so as the player character, you're the envoy. So you're a representative of the Adirian Empire. You are the personal representative of the Emperor himself, and you're sent here on
você é representante do próprio imperador do Império ADI.
This mission to investigate
ADI. Não sei se pronunciei certo, vocês entenderam.
Spiritual plague. So on the one hand, you're avowed to the Emperor and the Empire that you serve, but while you're in the Living Lands, you might discover another unique connection to something else that's very close to you. So this game is very much about choosing your loyalties and choosing what matters most to you. And that's all I'll say about this.
All right. Well, I know what matters most to me is getting to play this game. We'll talk more about that, but we will hear a little bit more because coming up, I want to say this Sunday, Carrie, you're going to be on Drop Frames with JP and Co and Ezekiel. So make sure you tune into that. Anything else? Before we let you go, though, that you want to talk about?
I just can't wait for players to jump into the Living Lands for themselves and explore all that it has to offer. Again, one of the big delights of being a developer on a game like this is creating so much for players to find and knowing that not everybody's going to seek it out and not everybody's going to find it, but knowing that the players who do are really going to enjoy the secrets they discover.
I know that we've talked about a lot of stuff, but it's still just
Just a slice.
Just a slice. Yeah.
I want it.
I know. Yes, absolutely. And we did get an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper. So thank you both again so much for coming out and being able to talk to us. But yes, it is such a small slice of it. So I'm excited to see more. And we did announce in Developer Direct that the game is coming out in fall 2024. So it won't be too long before we'll all be able to do so. And otherwise, we will see you for a regularly scheduled episode of the podcast with a regular length of a podcast later this week. So
Foi isso, galera. Gostei do que vi. O que é que vocês acharam aí? Dá uma nota de 0 a 10, considerando que é só uma pequena apresentação, etc. Gostei do que eu vi. Dá até uma hypadazinha, né? Acho que eles estão no caminho certo. É uma empresa que se comunica muito bem também com os fãs. Eles estão fazendo um bom papel. Eu tô achando bem legal. Espero que dê tudo certo com a Avowed, que eles merecem. Eles trabalham muito bem. Galera, foi isso. Já ficou um vídeo muito longo. Agradeço demais para quem assistiu. Não esquece de deixar o like e se inscrever. Até mais. Tamo junto. Um grande abraço.